environment as a defensive environment is to mischaracterise it, actually.
And just to Sir Robbie, so you've clearly a man of very strong political convictions and have held multiple posts both at the BBC and then over at Number 10 for the last couple of decades. And how have you managed to keep these roles separate and managed your own bias, given that this is all about, accusing the BBC of bias and accusing the BBC of not being able to look at its own lines? So how do you manage your own?
So I was Director of Communications for the government for 2 years, but I was a BBC news producer for 25 years, including being a programme editor and head of BBC Westminster. So I have a long track record. I primarily want to be defined as my commitment to the BBC, not my 2 years working for Theresa May. When I first joined, I think I joined the BBC in 1991, it was drummed into me about impartiality, and it's one of those things, those early impressions have basically dominated my thinking, and it's why I wanted to stick with the BBC. You're told to leave your politics at the door. And impartiality isn't just a sort of a moral obligation, it's also a legal obligation. I'll tell you one thing that's really, really important. If you want to find the people that are most critical of journalism when it becomes biased or inaccurate, it's other BBC journalists, because their reputations are damaged by it. And I think there couldn't be a bigger mismatch between the way I'm presented in some quarters in relation to my attitude. I think I've become weaponised in terms of how I'm perceived. Everyone who know me, I'm hugely impartial. I have friends across the political divide. I have impartiality through my bones, and I've always been a big campaigner.
I appreciate, but there is a question of sort of perception. Is it so? How do you manage perception? You said it's been weaponised, but I suppose it's difficult for people to separate those things.
Sure. One of the problems of being a non-exec member of the board is it's very, very hard to speak for yourself. You get calls from the journalists asking for a response, and you just don't want to engage. And that's one of the reasons I'm absolutely delighted to come here and give an opportunity to set out my case, where hopefully I can demonstrate that the perception is actually wrong.
Will you move on?
No, carry on. At the end of yours, whenever.
I've got a couple of. Cam, do you want to come in?
If that's all right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. So, Robbie, you talk about leaving your bias at the door. Shortly after you took over at the Jewish Chronicle, a second-generation columnist, Jonathan Friedman, resigned, stating that too often the Jewish Chronicle reads like a partisan ideological instrument, its judgments political rather than journalistic. How does that tally with the statement about leaving politics at the door?
Well, I think you've got your timeline wrong. That particular statement happened after I had left. I left any involvement in the Jewish Chronicle in August 2024. A number of points I'd like to set out here is, firstly, I had no editorial role whatsoever on the Jewish Chronicle. It had no bearing whatsoever in my work with the BBC. My relationship with the Jewish Chronicle was fully declared. And Chair, if I had the opportunity to explain why I ended up being a non-Jewish person chairing or being a director of the Jewish Chronicle. The Jewish Chronicle is the oldest Jewish newspaper in the world, 200 years old. It was about to go under through liquidation. I was approached to join a consortium by an elderly Jewish fund, person.
Remember his name?
Well, adventures, I will come to that. Philanthropist, and that's not his name. That's obviously his role. And it was his involvement and his funding of the Jewish Chronicle was conditioned on him not becoming a public person, because you can see more recently, but even then, the amount of the safety issues were very, very high indeed. So the original plan was for me to be director for like 2 weeks after we won. It ended up being a lot longer than that because there was complications in how charity law had changed. So I was doing a favour. I didn't get paid. Had no particular reason to be involved other than I was asked to do so. I had no involvement editorially whatsoever, and it's now for unfortunate reasons I ended up owning it or being director of it for much longer than I'd anticipated.
What was your role in the establishment of GB News?
After leaving Number 10 and before I joined the board, I was approached to help with a fundraise, and I helped with the fundraise, presenting what I thought my vision of GB News, which is somewhat different to the way it's turned out. But I never worked for GB News once it became a news channel.
Thank you.
Yes, Ruby, did you want to come in?
Thanks. Yeah, just off the back of the questions Natasha was asking. Good to meet the three of you. I think, Caroline, it's the first time. Samir, I remember meeting at a party when you were at Juniper, and Robbie, I used to have your number. You used to phone me up for Daily Politics.
I know,
we're not as close as we used to be. How sad.
I'm very disappointed by that.
But Daily Politics was commissioned by Juniper, I think, was it? So I think
No.
you guys,
the
Sunday
programme you're
Politics,
confusing is when
the
I was
Sunday
running
Politics,
Juniper,
the
I
Daily
made a
Politics.
programme for this
Anyway,
week with Andrew Neil, Michael Patillo,
the
and
Sunday
Diane
version,
Abbott.
that's
And
right.
then-
So you two probably knew each other
and
way back.
Robbie
Okay.
Gibb was the commissioning editor of
At the
that.
BBC, the political programme, I remember, yes. And we all miss your brother. He was a very good schools minister, very responsive. Whenever we had school issues, we'd be up there at the department.
I think I
So-
could definitely agree with you.
You are? No. Look, my question. So, Robbie, congratulations on your knighthood. I think that's since we last spoke as well. So, congratulations on that. I guess prior to you taking up the role, your views on the BBC were quite out there in different newspaper articles you wrote. So there's the one from August 2020 in The Telegraph, I think, where you talk about how the BBC needs to get its ship in order. It says that BBC journalists are letting their preferences show. Even any student of impartial, inaccurate press can see this, and it includes a bit of an attack on Lewis Goodall in that article. Then there's a Daily Mail one about the Today programme the same year. Trapped by its own groupthink, it is radio misery, sneering and monstrously out of touch. Do you think that's still the case? That was 2020. You've been on the board since then. Do you still hold those views of the BBC?
Well, the particular issue around Today programme was that during I think it was the 2019 general election, it was unfortunate because I can see how it happened, is that they had outside broadcasts in universities up across, and they had a lot of. Unfortunately, the views expressed were not the views of that story. So the actual debate, that election, the debate was very much in Red Wall, and that created a real problem for them. But I understand why they did it. They wanted to get younger audiences participating. So I don't really see that from anymore in Today programme. They're taking a lot of their output out of central London now into different parts of the country, which is good. In terms of revealed preferences, I feel very, very strongly that you leave your politics at the door, and if you are tweeting, if you take the sum total of people's tweets, you take the sum total of their output, and you know where they're coming from, that is a problem. Because the BBC has to be for everyone. I know lots of BBC journalists. I know their politics because I've been around the BBC a long time. People from very much from the left. They are, you could not tell for one second. And you mentioned Lewis Goodall. I think Lewis Goodall is a very, very talented journalist. So much so, I was the person that recruited him into the BBC in the first place. And on the basis that he came from the IPPR. He was a talented guy, and I wanted to bring people with a diversity of opinion into the BBC. My issues are not particularly focusing on him, is that where people, and that's what I was writing about at the time before I joined the board, where journalists behave in a way which the public know where they're coming from. That is a real problem. One of the things, another credit to Tim Davie and his management of the BBC, introducing some very, very clear guidelines for Twitter, X, and you don't really see those stories anymore. I think the BBC have cracked it.
We've had people like Andrew Neil. I mean, there's always been people, and there's always been political appointments, haven't there? Gavin Davies and, I don't know, James Purnell. Lewis Goodall is still doing podcasts saying that you made his life hell. Why are people saying this? Why is Emily Maitlis writing an article that an active Tory party agent is shaping BBC News output? That's cuddly old you. Why
I
are
think it
people
mentions
saying
my name
these
in that
things?
article, but look, I mean, I don't know why people write that. it's not for me to say. But perception is important, but not as important as reality.
And is it true that, I don't know, we hear there is a culture of fear. We hear there was the all-staff meeting last week. Many people felt very dismissed. Their questions were completely cut. And I think, Samir Shah, you said it was disrespectful of them to raise such issues.
I didn't say it was disrespectful of them. I was doing an all-staff meeting. I know that was dead. What I was trying to say is that, and we talked about...
Sorry, by the way, I should have declared an interest. I was a former staff member at the BBC in the 90s. It was a long time ago, BBC Western
You
House.
mentioned Robbie, and can I just say...
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
That,
So just
and you mentioned
the
that I
picture we're getting
ran this
painted.
programme called This Week with Andrew Neil and Michael Prescott and Diane Abbott, Rachel, played by Alan Johnson. Every week I spoke to Robbie. He was the head of that department. And not one week did he ever play any politics. If anything, because of Andrew's and Michael's position, he was very keen that the other side, was the Lib Dems, also featured on the sofa. So if there was any push, it was always in the other direction because of the politics of those two. So I have absolute faith in Robbie. Robbie as a journalist, that's my experience of him. Obviously I wasn't involved in his recruitment of the board, but my experience of him was spent many years. So I think it is unfair to say that Robbie comes with, he's principally a journalist. He was a journalist running the whole BBC's political journalism, and he did that with great skill and great commitment to impartiality. That's my view about it. What I was talking about is that people, and I would say that the board of the BBC is full of really extremely experienced, very good people, and I think we should respect them. They're giving their time, they're giving their work on it, and that's what I was talking about. And as a whole, I don't like ad hominem attacks. I think we should look at what they say and the content of what they say, rather than it being a personal ad hominem point. And that's what I was saying. Saying, of course, staff, and people who know me, I go around talking to staff, and as you know, I have monthly lunches with junior staff to hear from them directly what they think of the BBC, and I get a lot of feedback. Staff are absolutely entitled to say what they want to say about me, but I think just in terms of ad hominem attacks, the individuals on my board are good people, they're experienced people, they say wise things, they challenge, as indeed are the executives. And I just want us to respect that.
We need to move on, Rupa, because otherwise we're going to run wildly out of time. Can I just very quickly ask Sir Robbie, there's been a lot of speculation in the media, including BBC journalists, who are saying that what's happened to the BBC over the last couple of weeks was a board-level orchestrated coup, if you like. Can you just address that for me now? You know, do you recognise that characteristic? Was there anything orchestrated about what's happened to the BBC over the last couple of weeks, the departure of Tim Davie, etc.?
It's up there as one of the most ridiculous charges. People had to find some angle. It's complete nonsense. It's also deeply offensive to fellow board members who are, as Samir was saying, are people of great standing in different fields. The idea that somehow I'm not even sure what the charge is, to be honest, and basically other than to say it's complete nonsense.
Alan?
Yes, I certainly wouldn't have characterised anything I saw in the last couple of weeks as being a board coup.
Or any kind of orchestrated board level?
No, endless debate,
Okay.
but no orchestrated.
Let's go back to Natasha.
Sorry, can I just clarify something? Because you said that you weren't involved with, obviously, Robbie coming onto the board, but were you involved in helping, also not helping, but what was your role in Dr. Shah becoming chair? Was there any... Nothing? Okay, just clarifying, for me to know.
The chair is a public appointment.
Yeah, but I was just wondering, was there any conversations, were your views canvassed in any way? Were you asked your opinion on that?
When I applied for it, as I obviously know many people in the BBC, I've worked for it, I've been involved in it, and I did canvass, including Robbie and many others, whether they thought it was a good idea I applied for the job or not. I have to say, many thought it was, and I remember one, and I won't quote who it is, he said to me, he's a very senior BBC executive, he said, You know, it's one of those jobs. If you don't get it, you might be rather pleased.
You're feeling that way now. That's right.
Well, you know, I knew what he meant.
This week.
Natasha.
I was just wondering, just for like process sort of understanding that. So over the weekend we had some reports of a resignation from the board. So Dr. Shah, why did Mr. Banerjee resign from the board?
I'm very pleased you asked me that question. So let me explain to you Sumit Banerjee's role in the board. He is one of our non-executive directors. He's a formidable man with a formidable intellect, and he's contributed enormously in the 4 years he's been on the board. He comes from I believe, a management consultancy, an internationalist commercial view. When its time came up for renewal, which he will be leaving the board in 4 weeks' time, I had a discussion with him in the summer saying that the skills I was looking for over the next few years, especially over charter and funding, were a different set of skills than the ones he possessed, and we would come to an agreement that after 4 years he has contributed extremely well to the BBC debate, but I'll be looking for someone else. Right now, that process of recruiting a new non-executive is underway, and I looked last week at the shortlist, which is a remarkably good, strong shortlist. Caroline is part of it, because she's part of the nominations committee, which I chair, which will recruit this, and I was very heartened by this. So I was, and Shumit was going to leave. The letter came, private letter. The one thing I would say is that what has been picked up is that he was not consulted at that weekend when the resignations of our two most senior people, and there was a discussion. I look back because my memory was that he was. And I can tell the select committee that at 12:47 on that Sunday, I had a 26-minute call with Mr. Banerjee. So that was the weekend in which these things were discussed. I was responding to a request from Tim Davey because this was a very difficult moment. I said it's not a matter for a formal call for the board to discuss whether one of his executives should or should not be there. That's not mine. However, as a good chair, and because of the seriousness of which the events of that weekend, which led, and may I say, to the resignation of two very senior people, this is a very big event. So you would expect me to discuss with NEDs, and I did, all of NEDs over that Saturday and Sunday to hear what they had to say. Included in that discussion was, as I said, a 26-minute call to Mr. Banerjee. I know precisely because of the miracles of smartphone technology, I can scroll back and see it. So I'm both disappointed and surprised at what he had to say. He has a few weeks to run, and all I can say is I'm disappointed by that.
So I suppose if he's only got a few weeks to go to sort of leave now, feels like it's a bit of a statement in itself, the timing of it. So I'm just wondering, it's been reported that he's described it as being governance issues at the top of the BBC as one of the reasons that he's decided to leave. Was there any more detail around that?
He said it was a private letter to the board, so I will keep that privacy, but it was leaked in some way because one word came out, and I would simply say he was consulted.
Would we, as a committee, be able to see that letter privately, maybe?
Can I take away that question? I mean, obviously, I want to be as open and as frank with all of you, but it is a private letter, and let me reflect on that and decide how to deal with it.
There was reports today, I believe, in the Eye about a second board member who was on the verge of quitting, and there's also been reports of the role of the EGSC expanding and the creation of a new deputy general role. Dr. Shah, is this not sort of a bit of an admission that perhaps your leadership in this needs to be looked at as well, in terms of whether or not you're able to get a grip of what's happening on that board and if it's all working the way it should do?
You asked a number of questions there. I think on the business of the EGSC and how that should change, I've asked Caroline to do that, and maybe she can speak to the action she's taking and the answers that she will come up with. for the board meeting in December. On your last point, no, I don't think that's right. I think right now my job is to steer the ship out of the shop into an even keel and make sure, and the most important job I have right now is to recruit a Director General. It is far and away the most important thing I need to do.
Would it help I'm a senior independent director, so one of my jobs obviously is to liaise with the other non-exec directors, and I should tell you that that Samir has the unanimous support of the board. And that was established at the beginning of what you might call the current crisis, so about a week ago, and was repeated on Friday night. We are very lucky to have him as chairman. And
okay. But there are issues here, aren't there? We're looking now at changing how this all works, and it's taken quite some time to get there. So that was why I asked the question.
Of course, it's completely reasonable. Sorry, completely right question to ask. Sorry, but
and then to wrap up before I think one of my colleagues kind of jump in. So where do we go from here then? What's the next steps for the board?
Well, we are united on the steps that need to be taken. I think let me put them in three categories. The first is we need to examine the editorial failures and take actions, and part of that is to do with examining. We already know one outcome of that, which I think is very serious, and that's the resignation of our head of news, which I think is, as I repeated, was an important, the right thing to do. She took responsibility. On the governance issue, at the heart of which is the EGSC, Caroline will be coming back to the board with answers. And specifically on the memo that Mr. Prescott wrote, Peter Johnson, one of our head of complaints, will be looking in detail with every single point, asking whether the actions we have taken or actions the management have taken are good enough, and are there more actions to be needed. So that will all come back over the next day. At the same time, I have with my nominations committee and the board, secure a new Director General.
Can I just ask you a very quick question, Dr. Shah? You suggested, in answer to questions to Natasha, that letter from Dr. Banerjee may have leaked, and also we know that the memo leaked. You've got a bit of a problem with leaks in the BBC at the moment. Do you know how did the letter, but also more specifically the memo, how did that find its way to the Telegraph? Have you managed to get to the bottom of that?
I have instituted a leak inquiry. We are a journalistic operation, and it doesn't surprise me that we leak, but these were two very serious leaks. So both, as you heard from Mr. Prescott, he had no intention for it to go out. I don't believe that Mr. Banerjee, in his note, also did not expect to make the news, if I quote him properly. But I do think we should have a leak inquiry, and I've initiated that.
Caroline Thomson, are you a faithful or a traitor?
I was just, there was a wry smile from me, because actually at one level you could say this is a test of what very good journalists we employ, that they manage to get the stories.
Let's move on to Liz, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask Sir Robbie, do you agree with Deborah Turness's statement that recent allegations that the BBC is institutionally biased are wrong?
I do agree with her, yes. And if I could expand, if that's okay. The reason I would never use that, because it implies that all BBC journalists are biased, which I absolutely don't believe that. I mean, you could trot through some, Gary O'Donoghue's fantastic reporting of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, fantastic. Quentin Somerville, and a person, the unsung hero of covering politics, Chris Mason. They're absolutely first rate, and anything that would impeach their impartiality would be wrong. It's also worth noting, with regard to Michael Prescott's memo, there was nothing on BBC Westminster or Millbank, nothing on BBC Northern Ireland, and there's a reason for that, because those particular areas and other areas as well are centres of excellence. They have a lot of scrutiny on a daily basis. They can make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but they correct it very, very quickly. So the reason I agree with Deborah in relation to that, it's we do have some issues, underlying issues in some areas which the BBC have held their hands up to and are addressing, but to tar the entire BBC with that brush would be completely inappropriate.
And were you sorry that Deborah resigned?
I was disappointed that we ended up in this situation. that she ended up resigning. But it's, as a non-exec member, it's not for me to comment on exec members of Tim's team.
There have been 3 resignations in the fallout from the publication of the dossier. There's an argument that if you're a journalist and you were a journalist for over 25 years, the last thing you want is to become the story. Given the reports of your attempts to shape editorial judgments and the persistent questions about whether your political views have influenced BBC decision making, how can the public maintain trust in the BBC's impartiality under your oversight? And in light of these conflicts, have you considered resigning?
There's a lot in that question. If I can be as brief as I can, I'm a non-exec director. I have no involvement in pre-broadcast content. I have no involvement, and rightly so, in operational matters. There's been lots of stories that are just completely untrue about me in relation to influencing the day-to-day output. In Tim Davies' leaving note, he talked about these issues being weaponised by people. I think he was particularly referring to people that have latched onto the issues in the Prescott memo, the errors, and are using it to bash the BBC. And it's often people who don't agree with the BBC for a whole range of ideological reasons. It's also been politicised in the other way, as a way to have a pop at me. There's something illegitimate, making my role as if I'm not legitimate. Actually, the most people, his response to the memo, who are critical, want the BBC to do better. And I think, so yes, I think it has been weaponised, and I've been the victim of that weaponisation. But broadly speaking, I think most people want the BBC to do well, and parking those two particular extremes. So in answer to your question, no, I don't see, I've not done anything wrong. I'm a passionate defender of the BBC. I'm passionate defender of its values, the licence fee. I was involved in a minor way in helping James Burnell in the last charter renewal. So everything I've done throughout my entire time at the BBC has been to help and to promote the BBC.
You have no intention of resigning?
Correct.
Dr. Shah, as we just heard, Tim Davies said of the BBC, we should champion it, not weaponise it. Do you feel like the BBC is being weaponised?
So I've been involved in the BBC for many decades. I used to work for the BBC when I ran the Current Affairs Department, and then I was on the board, and then I made programmes for it. It is, whenever the BBC makes a mistake, and I think you asked the question, I don't think it's enough to say 99% of the time we get it right. I think when we make a mistake, it's an important thing. We need to identify the problem and take the correct actions. It's not enough to say, well, everything else is great. It's important we hold ourselves to high standards. But when we do make a mistake, what tends to happen, has happened over the years, is that people who want to have a go at the BBC use it to have a go at the BBC. And I said at the beginning here, I apologise for the people who care deeply for the BBC and want it to survive and thrive. And most people do. I do think that when these situations rise, there is a kind of firestorm around it, and people use it as a way of criticising the BBC for the mistake they made. We've always made mistakes, and when we do, the right thing to do is to own up to it, fix it, and to your point, act quickly. I think one of the things I'm going to learn from these 3 weeks is we do need to find out and examine why does it take so long. I don't think there's any malice here in taking long, and I don't think it is about a sclerotic organisation. I think, but we do need to understand why it takes so long and try and fix that as well. It's important we do, because the longer it takes, the more it becomes a political football to be kicked around with. So it is, to me, one of the lessons. They're editorial, they're governance, and then there's this issue of speed of response. It's an important thing. It matters that we are just quicker and get on the front foot.
Thanks, Liz. Dr. Shah, Your colleague, Sir Robbie, is coming for quite a lot of stick in the media, as you're probably aware, for somehow wielding his right-wing bias to influence the board, albeit, I mean, looking at the recent YouGov figures, it shows that 31% of people think the BBC is biased in favour of left-wing views, compared to 19% who think it's biased.
31% in favour of left-wing views?
Yes, 31% say it's biased in favour of left-wing views, 19% in favour of right-wing views, and the number that think it's in favour of left-wing views is actually going up. So if he is wielding his right-wing bias, he's not doing it very well. But leave that to one side. What's your view? Is Sir Robbie overly politically biased in his discussions?
No, he's
with the
not.
board?
No, he's not. And my account of my dealings with Robbie when he was my commissioner, he's interested in impartiality and accuracy. And I do think that when he brings to the table, and he feels very strongly about it, the stories, the issues he raises, look at the substance of it. The substance of it is about being accurate and fair. Not often discussed, and maybe Sir Robbie will talk about it himself. There was an issue about a rail strike where, Robbie, why don't you explain that?
Yes, I am, conscious of, the perception of my bias. I'm always on the lookout for biases the other way to make sure that I can, demonstrate what I say. And I saw a story before last Christmas. It was a train strike, and the whole story, it was a regional journalist. It was the whole notion of the train strike was how inconvenient it was to passengers, and it was very, very dismissive, verging on the critical of the union striking. And so I spotted this. It clearly, from my perspective, lacked the union voice, either in tracking or in clip. I raised it, sent it to the head of BBC England and copied in EGSC, and it was agreed that was the case, and the journalist was spoken to, and he totally agreed, and that was good. One of the sorry.
No.
Are you responsible then in that case for the fact that YouGov found that 31% of people feel that the BBC is biased in favour of left-wing views?
So, look, I mean, this is the thing. I know it's hard to marry the fact that I spent 2 years as a director of communications for the government, not because of the government, and my genuine passion for impartiality. I want to hear the full range of views. I mentioned the recruiting of Lewis Goodall. I don't want the BBC to be partisan or favour any particular way. When you tune in, I want to know what is happening.
Can I begin to let me answer that question. I don't think that the way we address our issues are helpfully characterised as left-wing or right-wing. We examine things. Say, for example, which was not mentioned, we cover business coverage or the migration report, and there are issues we find that we're strong in some cases and we need to get better in others. I think the question is about, are we impartial? Are we covering all sides of the argument? Are we making sure that we are not showing any revealed preferences? That's what it's about. I just don't think of it. Is this a left-wing position? Take, for example, our discussion, as we do, which is a very important, in this time frame, the January to May, every 5 years, the BBC reviews its editorial guidelines. It's the most important document we have to make sure that every 5 years, it came to the editorial EGSC for rigorous examination. It then goes normal process to the board. We did that with great, and people discussed it. Even we discussed what is our position on the use of the word terrorist. So it's not just a simple, let's pass it. These are really important questions. These were debated. It was, again, a very strong, very helpful, very constructive debate. And that's how it works. I like differences of opinion. I like diversity of opinion. The worst thing for us is to have groupthink. We want to challenge, we want to... That's what's important. And it's important we have points of view representing, frankly, the country as a whole.
Okay, cool. Rupert?
Yeah, I don't think it's just the 2 years at the Conservative Party, though, is it? Did you not work on the Portillo leadership campaign? Because I think what's interesting is you've gone in and out, back and forth, whereas other people usually make the break, go to one or the other.
Sure, but I spent 25 years at the BBC. That's the important thing. I have been defined by these 2 years in number 10.
You have also worked.
I have worked for the Conservative Party.
The Portillo campaign. You worked for Francis Maud. So it's not just 2 years isolated.
No, but my point.
Anyway, look, that's. Oh, sorry.
But just for clarity, I was talking about how I've been defined. I'm not saying I haven't had any other political involvement in my history. I am 61, so there's a lot of time to fill.
So the EGSC, just wanted to ask, it's got a few holes in it now, right? Because of these resignations.
No, it's the board.
Oh, is this to me?
EGSC, or whoever wants to answer the EGSC question.
Mr. Banerjee was not a member of the EGSC, he was a member of the board.
But,
and there's no hole there because
the two, Tim Davey and Deborah Timeless were, weren't they?
Well, that will be part of course, Caroline's examination of the composition of the EGSC. So maybe you would like to speak to that.
For the moment, Tim Davey is still Director General, so he would still be a member of the EGSC and come to the meetings. Jonathan Munro is the acting Director of News, so he will come in replacement for Deborah. Okay. So we don't have holes at the moment, but what the Chairman has asked me to do is do a root and branch review of EGSC, which I'm doing at speed and at pace at the moment. And one of the things we will look at is the membership.
It does seem a very small number of people to be arbiter of editorial standards, and including someone who is known for their conservative past and being a bit partisan. I just wondered, I've seen the minutes of the 6th of March 2025, and there's actually an agenda item. Actually, it deals with the BBC Arabic issue, so I do agree with what was said by you, Samir Shah, in your letter, that some of the things in the Prescott memo were dealt with, so I don't know why they're in there still making hay, including BBC Arabic. However, plan for reform voters.
And for
reform voters. So there's a whole item in there about how there needs to be trust built with the reform electorate. Is there not going to be something similar planned for green voters? Those are going up as well in opinion polls. It does seem very slanted when you look at panel shows that there always seems to be Zia Youssef on it or Nigel Farage. This is a party with 4 MPs.
Yeah.
Why plan?
I'm happy to.
I'm happy to take it, but Robbie, why don't you start? And I'll come in on it.
So there's 2 issues there, both of great interest. So that particular meeting, Deborah Turness did a presentation on party support for the BBC, and it was a discussion by voting. There's a number of things, but then Labour very, very supportive, and then there was concern about why is it that reform voters didn't support. They had, hostility to the BBC. And she had various thoughts that was absolutely not about doing stories that are favourable to reform, because that's how it could come across. One of her ideas was having more live discussion programmes in all. So that was what that was about. You look sceptical. So that was that. The second issue is something that's very close to my heart, is the issue about allocation of airtime to different political parties. And there's a general sort of metrics for doing it, is that you look at past and present levels of support over 2 electoral cycles as making a judgment. And the particular problem at the moment, of course, is that you've got, for example, Reform leading in the polls, but very, very few seats. You've got Liberal Democrats further down the poll with many more seats. You've got the Greens, as you pointed out, in second in some polls. And you've got the government, in a much lower percentage, but they are the government, and you've got the leader, the official opposition struggling on but less than 20%, but still the official opposition. It is the exec are massively alert to this, and we have updates at every EGSC on this very, very subject.
May I answer that? And let me step back a bit. One of the jobs of the BBC and its news division is to reflect the points of view across the country, that we are properly impartial, and we hear that. In establishing where we may be weak or where we are strong, we do a lot of research. We do a lot of research on various demographics. We want to, for example, we need to make sure levels of trust are just as high amongst young people as it is amongst old people. And this is normal business. We look at how the country responds and to trusting the BBC.
Just the reform voters, why not?
And what we discovered when we did the political analysis, it's among lots of, we do demographic analysis, we do geographic analysis. One of the things about geography, which I'm very exercised by, is that support for the BBC declines as you go further north. This is a very, very big issue for the BBC. We are across the country, and it's made one of my strategic priorities is we've moved programmes and production out. We need to move power out of London, and that will help establish better trust as we go further north. So it's not surprising that the news division examines itself.
It is surprising to the millions of licence fee payers that reform seems to be on so frequently. There's a plan for reform voters. There doesn't seem to be a plan for other parties.
We had a plan for how to reach young people, and how do we do that? And that's not just about content, it's also about the platforms.
Over some of the ones I asked Michael Prescott, just to get the other side of it, was there any discussion of the dossier with him before, or even the appointment at all?
What?
Yeah, with yourself, because you're friends, we've established now.
I don't think I had any conversation. I know him, and I've got to know him a lot better since he's joined, but there was no conversation with him prior to his appointment. And in terms of the only contact I had with him, I've not met him in person since Sorry, go on.
Yeah, in the run-up to the job. I think I asked him in the run-up to being appointed.
Nothing run-up to the job
and
at all.
Since the dossier.
Nothing in the run-up to the job. It's quite a long time ago, but I'm 99% certain that no contact. And in relation to the dossier, I phoned him about a week, coincidentally, prior to him sending his dossier, just checking in. I hadn't seen him or spoken to him since while I was walking along. And he actually asked me, or he told me he was thinking of sending a note to Samir as chair about his concerns about his time on EGSC, and did I think it was a good idea? And I thought, well, fair enough. If you want to do that, that's fair enough. But then I think I then phoned you, Samir, and mentioned this to you, if you recall, and I think to check how it arrived. And the next thing I found was this whole dossier in my inbox as a member of the board. So something happened between him saying to me he was thinking of writing to Samir as chair, and him deciding to send to the whole board.
And just lastly, I mean, some of the things in there, the Gaza coverage, for example, it would have surprised many that he saw the BBC position as what it was, because we get email. And again, Tim Davey in that chair used to always say we get complaints from both sides. So, again, has the EGSC ever considered the Centre for Media Monitoring report? That was a 188-page systematic look at every mention of Gaza, and I think they found that the equivalent number of deaths, IDF death, did not amounted to many thousands of Gazan deaths. I just wondered, I mean, because his thing seemed so partial, and I don't think he really allayed that fear, that it was all from one perspective. Would the EGSC ever consider left-wing type perspectives?
We've never looked at other people's reports in that sense. What we would do is look at particular concerns about accuracy, particularly. I've been interested. You've said quite a lot of
poverty or climate change, or any of
yeah. So you have raised an issue which I was interested in, about the dehumanising way in which the language used. I think I'm right in saying for about Palestinian casualties, and issues around the reporting of how we describe Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, I think that's interesting in terms of the language used for the Palestinian casualties, which I think I'm not unsympathetic to what you're saying. There's a type of research that used called sentiment analysis, which uses AI to make a proper assessment. And what I would say is that it's definitely the kind of thing I would like to see us digging quite deeply into when we do the thematic review into the Middle East. The trouble with that type of analysis, it's not very well respected and regarded, and so it's much easier and more pressing to do things about accuracy where you can really nail it. But I mean, you get me wrong. I am sympathetic to you in relation to those concerns being addressed.
I would say listen to your staff more, all staff meetings, all those letters with 400 signatories, not just one person every time.
Thank you, Rupa. Let's have Damien, please.
Thank you, Caroline. Dr. Shah, you came back a few moments ago to what I think is a central issue here, which is the speed of response. So I'm old enough to remember 2007, before your time leading the organisation, but when the BBC was in hot water over the misnaming of a kitten.
Oh, yes.
You do get held to a higher standard. That comes with the privilege of the licence fee. But on that occasion, it also took over a year and a leak for it to come out. So it's kind of all very well to say, well, we must just do better at coming out faster. But what is going to make the BBC face up and fess up faster?
I think that's such an important question. And I understand the scepticism that it always seems to take time. I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm heartened by one other area, it's a parallel area, which I was involved in. I took very great care to accept, which was what we call the culture review, where in my first year, I was determined to tackle abuses of power. And there was a lot of, we do this year in, year out, it's always happened. And there was some skepticism. But in the event, we did a very strong review. We came out earlier this year with, and I and the board, but I took personal ownership of trying to get this right in the face of skepticism. And I would say that the executive responded extremely well. There's a very serious set of actions that are in place now to tackle it. So, whilst I agree...
I'm going to have to rush you.
No, but what I would say is that I think I will equally, once I focus on it, say, what is the problem here? Why do we not come out more quickly? What is it that stops us, and how can we fix it? It's going to be absolutely one of the lessons I've learned of this particular 3 weeks. I do hear your skepticism because, you know, I remember that kitten story.
Socks, in case you're just delving deep. Socks and cookie.
Yeah. And so I think it's important, and I think it is a constant problem for the BBC that we do respond in a way that always puts us on the back foot. And I don't like that. I want us to be on the front foot and get out our statements clearly. If we made a mistake, hold our hands up fast. If we don't think it's a mistake, say that.
So returning to the backward-looking thing,
yes.
So what is in the Prescott memo? So the board is committed to revisit everything that's in that memo and to report back on them, on those items transparently about your conclusions. What does that mean in practice, and what is the transparency we should be looking out for?
Well, what I've asked Peter Johnson to do is to examine every single story and set out what actions we've taken, or the executive have taken, to deal with that. Then analyse whether those actions are adequate and whether more actions need to be taken. So be very precise to every single point. It may be that we'll find, for example, in my view, about the insurance thing, the action was taken and that's it, and we don't need to do any more. But there will be others where we think, Peter Johnson may think, well, these are the actions taken, A, B, C, but we now need to do D and E as well. So it's going to be very precise, and we're going to...
Earlier this afternoon, Mr. Prescott said to us that you should treat all the issues he's raised as systemic unless and until they are demonstrated to be otherwise. Do you think that is a correct way to go about that analysis that you're talking about?
Well, I should say I'm not clear what Mr. Prescott means by the word systemic.
Let me put... He's not here for me to put words in his mouth
but tell me.
In present. But I think what he means is, rather than saying it was a one-off, something went wrong on that Tuesday in March, somebody made an error, that there's something in the organisation, whether it's in the culture, the systems, the processes. I think that's probably what he means by systemic.
Let me talk about how I read those series of points that Mr. Prescott...
You do it concisely.
Yes, okay. So I think there were some individual errors, but I also think it points to some underlying problems. That's how I would describe them. For example, an underlying problem in the Arabic service...
Forgive me, so the question is, do you think it's a reasonable approach to this exercise that is about to be undertaken to start with the assumption that for each of those items it may have been systemic. We have to demonstrate it's not.
I wouldn't frame it in that way. I would ask Peter Johnson to look at each one on its own merits and examine. He's a very fine, very seasoned and experienced journalist, to look at each one and come to the board with an analysis of whether this is an individual error or a underlying problem error or it's a systemic error.
Thank you. And just finally from me, Sir Robbie, could you just say to the committee what you think it should be the future for the BBC, what role it should play in the next 10 years, which may be the same or different from in the past 10 or 20 or 30 years?
It's a nice open question. One of the things I do agree with Michael Prescott is the potential for the BBC. You know, in the world of totally dividing channels from Fox to all the rest of it and the internet, we have a brand, we have a DNA that could actually just lead the way, not just in the UK but globally. That is the thing I find most exciting. I think we've still got a huge opportunity to do that, and so in 10 years, yeah, I think that we could do that in 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Bio, please.
Thank you. Just on that last point, in the previous panel, Michael Prescott, you mentioned that he called you and sort of ran it by you effectively with regards to.
No, I called him. This is
regarding the memo.
Yeah, I called him a week prior, so it wasn't that way round.
Okay.
Just checking in because I'd not spoken to him since he left.
Yeah.
And in that he said he was thinking about, or had done, I couldn't quite remember, message the chairman. That was it wasn't anything else about the memo.
Okay. And so, do you sort of feel from that question he felt that it could be damaging to the organisation?
No,
the fact that he checked.
He didn't check. I phoned him and he said, he's thinking of sending a memo.
But you phoned him, but he brought up the issue that he was going to send it.
Yeah, because that was our primary connection was via the EGSC, and it was not in a reason. He must have just been writing his memo then. That's all I can assume. It was a very, very fleeting.
When you called him, did you know he was going to be preparing this memo?
No, not at all. No, I phoned him to check in. I hadn't spoken to him since he had left the EGSC as an advisor. He must just crossed my mind.
So he brought it up. I mean, look, I say this obviously because, you know, there's an element of perception the chair was talking about earlier as well. I think that, you know, there is a scenario where, imagine if Keir Starmer sort of recruited Alistair Campbell. There is that perception that is important here, and so that's why we're asking some of the questions that we're asking.
I totally get, and I hope I was trying to make the distinction between. Well, first, I was never as good a communications person as Alistair Campbell, but I only did it for 2 years.
That was good. All right.
But I did, unlike him, I did 25 years as a BBC journalist. So my whole DNA is very different to his. I'm an impartial BBC journalist, not a spin doctor by nature.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, has the experience of Mr. Prescott's memo where he felt the EGSC was not acting, so he escalated to the BBC board and altered your thinking on how the EGSC interacts with the board? So what do you want the SOAR review to achieve?
Would you like me to?
Actually, no.
So the review I'm doing is I've been given carte blanche by the chairman to really look root and branch at how EGSC is operating. I think what EGSC as it currently operates has many strengths. You've heard us mention, for example, the thematic reviews have been really useful, but it's perhaps turned a bit too much of a debating chamber as opposed to probably needing something that's more akin to an audit function. So something that's more into tracking actions, and I think this is a point that will resonate with some of the conversation we've been having today with you. Looking at the organiser of it, should they have a dotted line to the chair, the non-exec chair, so that you have a line of accountability there. And also the other thing that would resonate with what we've been discussing this afternoon is the way that the EGSC reports to the main board. I think one of the conclusions we're reaching is that, for example, on the Arabic service, one of the problems was a lot of action was taken, but no one communicated the action. You know, so the EGSC didn't know and the board didn't know. And actually tracking through actions properly so we can check they've happened, but also making sure that everyone knows they've happened and can see the results is one of the important things we'll probably do.
Okay. Thank you, Caroline. This question is to yourself, Dr. Shah. The EGSC used to be chaired by Nicholas Sorota, who was the Senior Independent Director. Why is the chair of the BBC board chairing the EGSC?
Yes, I think the issue of whether I, as the chair of the board, should also chair the EGSC is one that I would like Caroline to examine. As I said, nothing is off the table here. I think it's important we get this right, and I'm perfectly happy to take what recommendations she makes to the board and the board's outcomes of those recommendations. And being the chair of the EGSC will be part of that.
Okay, and I know that you've mentioned that you're looking to change the composition as well
Yes.
of the EGSC. So what will it look like?
Maybe Caroline should. I think
it will still have a mix of execs and non-execs, I think. I mean, I should say I'm speculating to you before I've been to the board with the conclusions. So, you know, they may, subject to the board agreeing them. I think it should have a broad representation of views as far as possible from within that. And we should still have independent advisors. But we might look at the role and how we define the job descriptions of the independent advisors. The two independent advisors you've seen today have their contracts already finished, so we need to reappoint them.
My final question to Dr. Shah. Were board members excluded from conversations on the Director General going?
On the Director General going?
Yes.
I don't exclude board members. I mean, you're talking about that weekend, yes. Where I spent the weekend talking to every single NED about the situation, and I wanted to hear what they had to say. When we had a board meeting in the late Sunday afternoon, the Director of News had resigned, and the Director General resigned. So we didn't have a board meeting to discuss. Well, first of all, it is not our position to discuss whether or not an executive working for the Director General is a matter for the board. It is not. It's a matter for the Director General.
Actually, just before you carry on with your answer, I say that because as the chair, there's a strong relationship that you have with the DG,
yes.
Director General, and so there's an element of protecting and supporting the Director General. So what I'm trying to get at is what happened there in terms of protection of a relationship that's very strong that obviously failed.
Yes. Let me repeat. I think the Director General, Tim Davey, has done an outstanding job as Director General, and I'm very sorry to lose him. Let me be clear. And it's not just me, the whole board, and I know that because I've spoken to them all, one-to-one, that he had the full confidence of the board and they wanted him to continue. No question. Tim knew that, and in his resignation, you will see his reasons for resigning, but I'll make it absolutely clear that neither I as chair or the board wanted him to go. He had our full confidence and we would have liked him to stay.
Okay, with him going, did you think about your position?
My position? Yeah. My job now is to steady the ship and put it on an even keel. I'm not somebody who walks away from a problem. I think my job is now to fix it. And that's what I'm doing. And I want to lead the organisation in such a way to address the issues we've raised, which are editorial, governance, and the issue of speed, and to fix that and lead what is really important here, the search for a new Director General.
Thank you.
Dr. Shah, there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks all across the media as to whether actually the job of a DG is just too big for one person to do and whether that role should be split down. Now, before you'll have seen we spoke to Michael and Caroline. They both thought that it was and that it should be split. They had different views about how that should happen. Michael thought that it should be an editor-in-chief alongside a sort of chief executive in a business sense, if you like, whereas Caroline thought there should be the other Caroline thought there should be a Director General and then a Deputy Director General. And that's been what's been reported in The Guardian, suggesting that might happen. Have you got a preference in that sense? Do you think the job's too big for one person? Should it be split down? How should it be split?
It's a very important question, and my view is that it is too big for one person. My view is that as we search for the new Director General, in that lens by which we search for that Director General, I should make it clear, and the Noms Committee should make it clear, and that there should be a Deputy Director General who's laser focused on journalism. Journalism is the most important thing and our greatest vulnerability. And I remember when I first started, I think it was mentioned, when I first started as Head of Current Affairs, John Bird was Deputy Director General and his focus was journalism. That did not mean that the DG was not Editor-in-Chief. We mentioned later on, more recently, Mark Thomson was the Director General. He was also the Editor-in-Chief. And even though Mark Thomson was a journalist by trade, he still felt the need to have a Deputy Director General, Mark Byford, in charge of journalism. That was then. Now, it seems to me it's even more important because the nature of news has changed. The importance, that, as Robbie mentioned, that this is an opportunity. The BBC needs to be the beacon of impartial journalism. It absolutely does. We are living in a world in the next 10 years where people need to trust us and we need to have a focus that our journalism is good. And I think that needs that. So I'm inclined to restructure the executive in the future, once we get a new director, that the lens through which we examine potential candidates for the Director General includes the idea that there will be a Deputy Director General who will be focused on journalism.
Thank you, Damien.
So, having a Director General and a Deputy Director General, the hierarchy couldn't be clearer. Did you think about doing it a different way, where you have a Chief Executive who runs the organisation and a, whatever you call them, Editor-in-Chief, who is ultimately accountable for content, and they both report into the board?
I think that's an interesting observation, but obviously the Charter at the moment does not allow that. In the Charter, the Director General...
It's going to get renewed quite soon, Dr.
Well,
Shah.
I think, as I said, it's a good moment for discussion, but right now, I have to replace the Director General, right now. And I have to replace it within the terms of the Charter. And the Charter allows that. I think the point you raise is worth raising. And we, as with many issues, we will be talking about the Charter. There are many factors about the Charter that we need to discuss and engage in. And we need to start that conversation.
Well, here you are in Parliament. It is an opportunity to express your views in any way you like.
Well,
so you're constrained by the current Charter. Were you unconstrained, would you take a different view?
Well, right now, my view, and I recall that the Chair would like me to take a position, I think that the idea of a DG and a DDG has worked well, and I can see it working again. I will need to be persuaded that the alternative one is a better solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Jeff.
Okay, thanks. That's the executive. Can we talk briefly about the board? So what do you want to do about changing the composition of the board? Particularly, would you want to change the number of non-exec board members?
Well, again, a matter for a Charter, and I've already said I'm looking forward to some constitutional innovation about the board. By that, I mean, I think we do need to take a look at the composition of the board, the flexibility there is, in the nature of the public appointments, how many public appointments there are. All of it should be a matter for discussion.
Do you have a view?
I do have a view. I would like, as the Chair, to have greater flexibility. At the moment, I have 10 non-execs and 4 execs. 14, that's it, rigid. And given the state of the way the world is changing and the kind of skills and experiences we need on the board, I would like greater flexibility to reshape the board to make it better able with the experiences to the world that's coming forward. We talked earlier about the impact of AI on journalism and the whole point about AI. If it's important now, can you imagine how important it'll be in 5 years' time? If I find that the board does not have enough expertise in that area, I'd like to be able to change that.
Okay, and can I ask about political appointees? Do you think it's right that do you think it's important to have political appointees to the board? Can I ask all three of you that question, actually?
Well, I'm sorry, what did you say at the end?
Well, is it important? Is it right for it to be political appointees?
Let me be clear, they're public appointments, not political appointments. Just be clear, there's a process.
It's about politicians.
You apply. And I think we should look at this. I think it's important. And the issue here for me is independence versus accountability. We need to be independent, but it's also important that we are accountable to the public, to Parliament, and the nations. The 4 public appointments are to the 4 nations. England, I don't need to spell them out. I think it's important the nations are represented on the board of the BBC. How that mechanic is, I think we can discuss it and we should make it clear.
Could those nations be the contributions be provided by somebody with journalistic experience, not appointed by the government?
I'm sorry, what, of the nations?
Yeah.
Well, I've given you my point about the executive. I think the Deputy Director General should be there. I think journalism is a good skill to have, but there are many skills. The BBC is a very, very big organisation, does many, many things. And I think whilst journalism is a very important part, my vision of that is that the DDG, who will be on the board, will be focused on that. The 10 non-executives, it needs to be accountable as well as independent. So I do see a role for people who represent the nations, because that's part of it. But how that happens, we can discuss it. And of course, as you know, I've left out the other public appointment, that is the chair, and I think the chair should be in that mix as well.
Thank you very much. Can I ask just one question on that? When you appeared in front of our predecessor committee,
yes,
at your pre-appointment hearing, you were asked whether you felt that it was acceptable that members of your board should be permitted to be members of a political party, and at that point you weren't able to give us a definitive answer. You weren't sure. Do you know now?
The answer is you can be a member of a political party. As it happens, Sir Robbie is not. We've had many people, even the chair, we will remember, was a member. Sometimes politicians are, and they're members of parties. The real thing is to have diversity of opinion, and there are party politics are left out, and we examine the point of the board.
Just super quick follow-up, not opinion one, but just on, if we're reforming the board, is there not an argument for having staff appointments on there? Because if you look at AFP in France and NPR, a number of those positions are reserved for, Robbie, you've done journalism, but I think your current board, if you look at it, it looks like it could be the post office board. It's a lot of people from business. So people who've made those hardened decisions, maybe even the foreign correspondents who've had to make quick decisions when, people are trying to weaponise things. Some of those people would be good on your board, some actual staff. What do you think?
You make a very, very good point. I was hoping, because of events, I haven't been able to make a speech about the BBC and its accountability and how we can make it more accountable. We have mechanisms to be accountable, as this is to Parliament, to the government today, but I'm concerned about how accountable we are to the public and the licence fee payer.
Also, having a board,
and I think,
of people who've done it.
Part of that accountability is, again, to do with the membership of the main board.
And last but not least, Vicky.
We all know that staff morale is really important. So how does the board assess current levels of staff confidence in the BBC leadership, given leadership transitions and the charter review? And then on that point, do we know when the charter renewal may be taking place? And will it potentially have to wait until the Director General is appointed?
Your last question, no. What's happening is that we're waiting, and we expect it to be imminent, the publication of the Green Paper. The Green Paper will be the government's attempt to secure consultation. And between the Green Paper and the White Paper, which will be their outcome, what they plan to do, we will be in heavy conversations and discussions about the Charter, about the purpose of the BBC, about the way it's regulated, about the composition of the board, all the issues, and fundamentally what the mission is. We then also have a parallel discussion is how do we fund that? The funding model will be another major. That will continue. Tim Davie is the Director General of the BBC, and he's helping us through that. He will continue to do that. So that cannot be paused awaiting the arrival of a new Director General. This is a matter of some urgency. We are in debate, we'll discuss it, we'll do that. On the matter of staff morale, I think this is a very, very important part. We have a very continuous measurement of staff morale. It's a very detailed look, and we're always looking at it. It is, as I said right at the beginning, you know, the events that have come recently has been something that I deeply regret, and it has had an impact, of course, on the thousands of people. So we will be measuring that and trying to make sure that we include them in as we develop our arguments.
Yeah, just briefly, what is the thing for measuring staff morale?
Metric for measuring it.
But how do you do it? Like what happens to measure it?
Well, we have we invite, go through effectively what you'd call a survey, a staff survey, and it's reported every year in our annual report. We do a comprehensive staff survey, and we do it in all sorts of different parts, so we can break it down, we can see where morale is, and not just morale, but loads of other factors. I can send you, if you would like, the detail of how we measure how the staff are thinking in a systematic, comprehensive way. But as you say, I also talk to staff, I have regular lunches with them, so I get a more anecdotal approach to it. But it's important that I actually meet staff and I see them face to face and not just numbers on a sheet. But we do have numbers on a sheet, and we do it very comprehensively, and we report it in the annual report.
Actually, not quite, because the question was about how they feel in terms of confidence in terms of the BBC leadership. Is that one of your questions within the survey?
It is a question that's going on. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear yet. Everything is asked.
Thank you, Vicky. Just finally, in terms of penultimately, in terms of staff morale, in 2023 the BBC had 8 equal pay cases open. Last year, our predecessor committee was told that there were 11, so it went up between 2023 and 2024. Do you know how many there are now?
I do not, but I can get you the figures.
If I was to tell you that I'd heard that there were 40 equal pay
40.
cases. Yes, that's what's being reported to us. I would really be very grateful if you could look into that and come back.
I will look into that and find out what the reasons for that increase
and
is.
If in fact that figure is
correct. If that is the figure.
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you. And then finally, the BBC shared in confidence with us the initial response to Mr Prescott's memo by Peter Johnson, which is the one that the board commissioned. Did you consider publishing that
report?
Yeah.
I didn't consider publishing it. It was important for me when the board discussed Mr Prescott's memo that they had a full and rounded picture of what did take place over the 3 years. You have challenged Mr Prescott on his selection. I think it was important when the board discussed it, they had a proper picture of all the different things we did consider and the actions we did take.
So would you be happy for us to publish that response?
Can I come back to you on that, because it was a private note?
Yes.
For the board, and
we think that it's quite helpful in setting out all the issues and
indeed,
going through
it
them
would,
one by one.
And I think I will reflect on that and try and look at it positively, because I think it slightly goes back to your point about speed. We do this work quite quickly. I asked for it to be done straight away because we were having a board meeting. We had the response, but we kept it to ourselves. And to me, it becomes part of this examination. What lessons can we learn about this? We've learned it, but also about the speed of action and what we can do and how we can publish more, be more transparent, so we're not on the back foot. And we need to understand the world we live in, and that if you don't get out on the front foot, then they will fill that vacuum with whatever they want to say. I think it's a really important point.
With that pace in mind, could you let us know quickly?
I will let you know. Great pace.
And also whether you're going to be publishing the new Peter Johnson report that you mentioned in response to Damien's questions as well. That's very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you for appearing in front of us today. Is there any further messages that you want to leave us with?
No, I think that's
You've had enough. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone for your time today. Order.